Ahead of the 2026 Eurovision Song Contest, the EBU announced the biggest changes to jury rules in the past decade. So what was the mess that led them to make those rule changes, and have they worked? Cast your mind back to 2023. That was the year that Europe went carrier crazy. Cha 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 won UMK with such a landslide that Carrier actually scored more points than all of the other acts added together. Around Europe, the pre-party crowds were going wild. This was the song that everyone wanted to see. And it inspired what I still believe to be my greatest Eurovision outfit ever. So when Finland was awarded 376 points in the televote, an absolutely enormous score, it seemed that everything was going to plan. And yet, it was Sweden that lifted the trophy. A feat even more remarkable when you consider that Sweden wasn't awarded the maximum 12 points from any country in the televote. The jury had denied Finland. The public felt robbed. In 2024, we saw a similar story. This time, Baby Lasagna was the people's champion. But again, the jury winner won. People began to question why we even have juries in the contest when they seem so hell-bent on denying the public champion. And it was an issue that threatened the very contest itself. Why would the public bother to vote if it felt like their vote was being wasted? Well, to understand the role of juries in the contest, I think it's helpful to go back to the start. 1956 and the very first Eurovision Song Contest. 1956, of course, is the olden days, which you'll be able to see from the black and white images of the first contest. The contest, and the world itself, was different back then. One of the major differences in Eurovision was that it was decided entirely by juries, panels of national experts. These juries literally had to ring up to hand in their points, which is what you can see happening here. This system was frankly the only feasible option at that time. However, outside of Eurovision, television bosses were looking at ways to reduce the gap between the audience watching at home and TV. In the same year that Eurovision launched, Opportunity Knocks aired for the first time on British TV. This was a talent show, but what made it groundbreaking was that it was the viewing public who decided who won. At the end of each show, they were encouraged to write in with their favourite, and next week, that act was announced as the winner. The public loved this. But it was a system not without issue, and certainly not one that would work in a competition like Eurovision. Fast forward to the late 1980s, and telephone adoption had increased to an amount that mass voting via phone became feasible. In 1987, Opportunity Knocks moved to the BBC, and that year the voting system changed. Now viewers could vote via telephone. Their votes were cast instantly, and the winner was announced that same night. Broadcasters across Europe and the EBU were paying attention. But Eurovision posed unique challenges. Different countries had different telecom infrastructure, and call handling capacity varied wildly between countries. The EBU needed a system that was fair, secure, and scalable across dozens of nations. Still, the idea of public voting was gaining momentum. Now, I haven't found a source for this, but I do wonder whether the BBC was one of the main broadcasters pushing for the adoption of a public vote. After all, they'd shown that they could make it work in their own shows. In 1996, the UK entry was dismissed by the juries, but became a global smash hit, highlighting the disconnect between jury and public taste.
Just a little bit, a little bit more, just a little bit, you know what I'm looking for.
I wonder whether this was the final motivation needed, because in 1997, public voting at Eurovision was trialled for the first time. Austria, Sweden, the UK, Germany, and Switzerland cast their points via public vote in that year. It worked, and from 1998, public vote became the default, with juries only retained as a backup. For a decade, Eurovision was entirely in the hands of the public. So, we had a perfect system where the song that the public thought was best would always win. Except it didn't. Sure, the public vote solved some issues, but it introduced a whole heap of others. Bloc voting and diaspora voting became impossible to ignore. Countries with large populations living abroad, such as Turkey and Poland, consistently received high points from nations with large diaspora communities. Meanwhile, neighbouring countries often exchanged points year after year, largely due to shared culture, language and media.
And the 12 points from Cyprus
Greece?
go to Greece.
Hey! Whoopee! About time somebody booed that.
Thank you very
Goodness
much, Mario,
sake.
and good evening
Pathetic.
to you.
These effects weren't necessarily malicious, but they did mean the playing field wasn't level. In 2008, the BBC's commentator Terry Wogan famously said, "You have to say this is no longer a music contest." Alongside these effects, running order was disproportionately powerful. Televoters tend to remember the last songs and may have forgotten the songs that performed at the beginning. Without juries to counterbalance this, running order alone could have a large impact on the result. And then there's a deeper issue rooted into Eurovision, the tension between quality and popularity. Televoters tend to reward charisma, novelty, or an emotional connection, whereas juries tend to favour musical composition and technical vocal capacity. Neither approach is right or wrong, they're just measuring different things. But when Eurovision was solely decided on the televote metric, it meant that some songs were being left behind, and that risked the competition becoming less diverse. It created a competition that, while exciting, was unstable. The EBU needed a way to balance mass appeal with musical credibility, to level the playing field between diaspora-heavy nations and smaller nations, and to ensure that running order wasn't deciding the contest before it even started. The EBU's response was, in 2009, to introduce the 50-50 system, half jury, half televote. It was a system that combined popular appeal with expert opinion, bringing the best of both worlds to the contest. And it was a system that did largely work for over a decade. But then came the great collusion controversy of 2022. In 2022, 6 juries were found to have engaged in coordinated voting, awarding each other disproportionately high scores in the semi-finals. Research from the University of Stirling found that the odds of this occurring naturally were 1 in 10,000. The EBU intervened, replacing those jury scores with aggregated substitutes. And the scandal was so large that the EBU decided to remove juries entirely from the semi-finals from the following contest. This had an unintended consequence. Juries became more powerful than ever. With no jury influence in the semi-finals, fewer songs popular with juries made it through to the grand final. Then, when the juries suddenly could vote, they had fewer options to distribute their points, and that meant that the points were being funneled in fewer directions. This led to some enormous jury winner scores. The problem was, countries weren't just winning the jury vote, they were landsliding it. Loreen finished 193 points above second place, and Nemo scored the maximum 12 points with an enormous number of the juries. These leads were simply insurmountable. We saw this in 2023, 2024 and 2025. The jury winner always won, even when there was a massive televote favourite. The system designed to stabilise Eurovision had begun to distort it. In response to mounting criticism and looking to restore trust in the contest, the EBU announced significant changes. These changes were that juries were to be reinstated in the semi-finals, jury size increased by 2 members in each country, and each jury had to have at least 2 jurors under the age of 25. Do we now, finally, have a perfect system? Well, no, and to be honest, we never will. But these changes do seem to have had a positive impact. Of course, we've only got 1 year to look at, and we'll learn more as the years go on. But the changes do seem to have reduced the disproportionate effect of the jury in the final, and also diversified the makeup of the national panel. However, geopolitical voting still exists. Tactical voting still exists. And the tension between jury taste and public taste will never fully be resolved. Perhaps the real question is not whether Eurovision has fixed its jury problem, but whether a contest of this scale and complexity can ever reach perfect equilibrium. Eurovision is by nature a negotiation between nations, between tastes, between expertise and emotion. And maybe that tension isn't a flaw. Maybe that's part of what makes Eurovision so endlessly fascinating.